armed conflict is an issue. Of course, this forecast comes at a time when President Tinubu has been driving agricultural development in the country, an indication of potential challenges facing the food security target of the federal government. Recall in July 2023, President Tinubu declared an emergency on food insecurity in the country and moved the item to the National Security Council. Well, that's it. To provide some perspective, now I'm joined by the co-founder and CEO of Corporate Farmers International Limited, Mr. Akinwale Alabi. He joins me virtually now. Thank you for your time. Mr. Alabi, for joining us. It's good to see you. First time this year on the show with me here. It's good to see you.
Thank you very much, sir. It's an honor. And Happy New Year to you, too. Thank you very much for having me.
Happy New Year to you. Just before we touched on the World Bank's report, let's get a look at the effort of President Tinubu to drive productivity in the agri sector. Remember, in July specifically, last year, 2023, the president declared an emergency on food security in Nigeria. So talk to us.
Yeah.
How is this paying off?
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much again for having me. So, well, let's say the era of political promises are gone. It's now time for proper governance and moving the economy forward. Yes, rightly said, last year, the president actually declared state of emergency on food security in the nation. And you see, one thing I've learned over my years of working actively in the sector is that, look, food security is a three parallel based intentional is from the local government. Yes, President Bola Tinubu is doing his bit in terms of, calling together stakeholders to look at solutions around food and food availability. But again, the question goes down to, if President declares, what are the roles, specific roles of state governments, of local governments in achieving food security? Federal government cannot do it alone. So the responsibility also needs to be shared at the domicile level, where you have the rural farmers, which is more of the local government, and also the state governments that encompass or that embed these farmers together before we now talk about federal government. So it's a three-level role from the federal to the states and to the local. Federal government will declare policies, will give out intervention funds and donors to state governments, but how best are state governments or local government been able to utilize these funds, intervention inputs to local farmers? And most of these things still have to affect the rural farmers. Once it's not affecting rural farmers, definitely there is no effect, or whatever the president declares, it won't have any effect if at the end of the day, it doesn't touch or bottom line or touch light down to the rural farmer in that rural community. That is where the main work happens. That is where you find the farmers on the field, day in, day out, tilling the soil. If those policies does not affect them positively, then we are still in for a big trouble.
Mm. And so given your assessment, but would you say that it has touched at least some section of the country perhaps have benefited from that? But would you say really that it has impacted on the food value chain in the country?
Okay, so this is my own personal view. One, it has not touched anything. Yes, the government came into power is less than a year. But again, you must also know that agriculture is time-bound, and also both in terms of short-term and also in terms of long-term. So it's a two-way thing. In terms of long-term, we may not directly feel the effects, okay? But on short-term, there are a couple of things that needs to be done ASAP by the federal government, state government, and federal and state governments, technically, so that food can easily be assessed. And what are these things? Number one, the level of insecurity is still very, very high. If these things are still very high, no matter how much pressure, no matter how much policy funds we push into the sector, farmers can still not go to the farmland to farm because of fear of being kidnapped or insurgency. So these are issues that we need to solve, number one. Then number two, is that time state government needs to be very, 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 I say very, very intentional about food security, okay? So it means that they need to do everything and provide measures across the entire value chain, from production to harvest, to input generation, to marketing, distribution, mechanization, funding of farmers within the confine of your state. Because you see, everything that we do as farmers, okay, is still domiciled in a particular land, in a particular state, in a particular local government. And if these things are not well looked at carefully, we'll still be struggling and still be speaking in big grammars. At the end of the day, we're still going to have food not available to every citizen or you and I that are looking towards or having food on our table daily. These are the critical measures. These are the critical issues that we need to tackle, to ensure that we have food security across board.
But back to the World Bank's report, all the 7 states captured in its projection are major contributors to the bulk of food produced up north. So how critical is this projection when states that are supposed to be major sources of farm produce are now going to suffer from shortage?
Well, it's not hard, and it's all about insecurity. These are facts. Most of the states you mentioned today, these are red flag states, which have issues one way or the other when it comes to insecurity. And you know that today in Nigeria, our food, 90% is grown in the northern part of the country. And if farmers are being moved from farm settled areas, okay, to probably IDP camps or their farm domicile centers or areas or communities, and are being chased away by bandits or whatever you have it, it's going to be difficult because there's a contribution each of these community has towards food security. For example, look at what happened in Mango a couple of days ago, a couple of weeks ago. This is a maize-producing community in Nigeria, and there is a percentage of that contribution towards the food and maize ecosystem or maize production in Nigeria. Today, most of them have left their domicile farm zone centers or area community to another center. How do we now have food security? These are the issues. These are the problems. These are the critical problems. Once this can be tackled, then we're going to have bountiful harvest. And because, again, Nigeria is quite large and is quite big. And I said something earlier. State government has to be very, very intentional about food production so that the ball of the work can leave federal government, and state governors need to begin to come together and look at how they can begin to solve problems in their state and tackle food security. Mention states like Niger State, for example, what the governor is doing, ensuring food security, clearing lands, and meeting partners across the world in ensuring that they prepare themselves ahead for the farming season. Also, what Lagos State is doing. Lagos is not a farm community state, but they've been able to channel what I call a proper market distribution centers, whereby you could go to the market and get your food affordable and even with a discounted price. Okay. Now, these are areas governments, state government particularly, needs to look at and how their citizens can benefit directly by creating jobs and also providing an enabling environment where agriculture can thrive, which will also attract both local and also other international partners. At the end of the day, Nigeria can be food secured. If we can't do all these things or put these things together, we'll still be struggling and still be going round in circles, still speaking grammars, taking pictures, and no effect on food price in our markets.
Now that you talked about food price, if you look at the current or the latest CPI report from the National Bureau of Statistics, it put food inflation at 33% high. Perhaps the World Bank's projection underscores the urgency of addressing the complex factors contributing to food insecurity in the country. So what do you suppose, or what alternatives are available for us to explore if we have insecurity in the farm and we cannot go to our farms? Are there alternatives that we can subscribe to?
So, my brother, there are alternatives, actually. There are alternatives. Now, is that time for everybody to now begin to venture both directly or indirectly towards food production? Let me give you an instance, and these are clear facts. In my mother's house, my mother is over 70, going to 80. Now, what I did for a retired principal, so what I did for her was to construct or set up a small farm where we planted vegetable, pepper, whereby she can go there and pick all of these things and have that mini farm at the back end of our house. So I may employ that is that time for every Nigerian to begin to look at home gardening or alternative planting measures, whereby you can have a mini farm either in your urban house or your local house, anywhere at all. Begin to set up mini structured farms anywhere around your farm. My daughter, I begin to train her on rabbit farming, and she's more inclined into that particular value chain today. So everybody needs to begin to embrace the business or the culture of agric so that you can have enough food. And because again, food is essential for human existence, food is essential for human being, and food essential for economic growth. So the alternative, as I said, is for every Nigerian to begin to look at ways they can begin to structure properly, farm within their rural homes, within their urban communities, anywhere at all, so that it can burden off the huge insecurity of food effects across the board. And again, and I'm still going to mention it again, state government has to sit down, design policies, and sit down, design measures within the confine of the states to support their local farmers, especially local farmers, get their data and look at what they would need to grow specific crops that that state is known for. Let them begin to produce more of that, expand it, equip them, fund them, and provide alternative measure in terms of services for these local farmers so that you can have bountiful production at the end of the days. These are which can be both in short term and also in long term. When these are put in place, then we can begin to smile and our nation can begin to move forward toward food security. Everything cannot be tackled or solved at the federal level. State government has a role to play, local government has a role to play. We as Nigerians has a role to play toward food security, and it begins right from our home. Like I said, I have set up something for my mother who is over 70 so that she can begin to also harvest and from farm to table, whatever she needs, go to the farm, pick it and cook it in your pot and have that. With that, we can begin to have that mindset of food security and food. I know everybody can't do that, but we can start somewhere as Nigerians.
Let's talk about the implications of the spillover effects on neighboring states and how can regional cooperation be leveraged to address the issue, bearing in mind that the large chunk of vegetable consumed in the country is from up north. And I know that you did talk about the fact that states also have to, play a role significantly at that matter, right? So talk to us.
Yes.
What are you looking at for state funding, partnership, large, scale farming? So what are you looking at?
So you see, because Nigeria is quite big, and again, because we live in a multi-ethnic country, so we must begin to open up our minds to work with one another, both from the north to the south, to the west to the east. And that's one of the things that I so much appreciate about Lagos State government, in terms of interstate partnership. That is very key at this point in time. In fact, one of the things that I personally, respect about the governor of Lagos State with the Commissioner for Agriculture, Abisola Olusoya, is ensuring that Lagos has that population. But because Lagos is not a it's not a 100% farming community or a farm state, they have to rely on interstate partnership with Niger, Kwara, Benue, other neighboring states. That is what we need to begin to do right now. Look at your strengths as a state. Leave your ego and begin to look at which governor or which state can support me in producing this? Even if I'm going to have the infrastructure, which states can I, show down to help me produce this or to help me, plant this or do so? Let's look at more collaborations for partnership within the state. And also, it's that time I begin to reach out to international partners, donor agencies, development banks like AFD. What AFDB is doing also is very great with the SAPC project in ensuring that we begin to implement processing in Nigeria across the state. So not just producing alone, we can also begin to process, okay? So if I'm producing rice in my state, for example, and I have enough paddy, I should be able to have a structured 21st century milling factory, in my state, so that once I'm processing, once I'm producing, I'm processing. The same thing can go for tomatoes, okay? If I'm producing tomatoes, I should have a processing facility that can convert that into tomato paste and other things. The same thing goes for maize, goes for cassava, and other types of agricultural produce. Also, livestock also mustn't be left out. Aquaculture, these are big value chain commodities that we can trade globally for exports if we are serious about the base of agriculture. We have today states like Kebbi State, okay, trade their onions across different West African regions, okay? So these opportunities we have in Nigeria, we have the land, we have the human capital, but government has to be intentional about food production, food processing, funding, and also building capacity for local farmers. If you can put all these things together, then definitely we'll be food secure.
Well, just few things before I let you go. As at yesterday, the Presidential Committee on Emergency Food Intervention, chaired by the Chief of Staff to the President, met in the presidential villa to begin fine-tuning plans and actions targeted at addressing food insecurity in the country. So what are the concrete steps that the government can take to mitigate this, this crisis? What do you want to see captured in their plans going forward?
All right, thank you very much. We've had this kind of sitting before. We had it last year. Despite that, food is still on the high rise, my brother. You see, it's all about we as Nigerians. It's a different thing between releasing our statements and action. Okay, now and the things that I want to see being captured, as you have asked, is that look, we must look at addressing food from two perspectives. Number one, short term, which is critical at the moment, and long term. Now, when I mean short term, look at how we can begin to reduce major taxes around food, okay, major food, primary food that are important to the country. Either you take those taxes out or you reduce it to the barest minimum so that the impact will not be greatly felt by homes that buy these things, okay? So when you begin to reduce all those levies, all those taxes, then there could be quite some good impacts. Food price will come down. This morning, I was just being told that noodles, I don't know which pack of the noodles, but I'm told that particular noodles now cost as high as 500 naira, which initially was about 150. That is extraordinary high. So let's look at these things, where are the foods that we consume daily, okay? And let's begin to look at the taxes government on all those things. Either we reduce them or take them out totally. That is one. Then two, we now need to go back to where the rural farmers are. This is not about photo ops. We need to go to where the rural farmers are across major states in the country, okay, and begin to fund and look at how we can provide directive interventions for them. Well, the Minister of Agriculture, Senator Kyari, is doing his bit, quite understandable, but there is need to still do much more. We need to go deep down to where rural farmers are and feel their pains and directly impact them, okay? Either in terms of seedlings and other inputs that will be necessary to grow so much more. With this, we're going to reduce the rate of unemployment and reduce the rate of banditry or whatever insurgency happening around those flagged northern states. So there's lots to be done. Number one, direct impact. Let's reduce the tax on food items, and with this, food can be made available at a very cheaper rate, and also provide direct intervention programs for local farmers, rural farmers in those villages, so that they can begin to plan and plant more and make these foods available at commodity markets.
Well said. Finally, why this may be seen as a humanitarian issue, talking about 7 states that will be affected up north, is also an opportunity for farmers and producers as well to perhaps it's time to get everybody on board, right? With the government acting as off-takers for as a lead in this initiative. So how do you think the government can get everyone on board? You talked about the role that the federal government is already playing, and of course, what the state government should do. But the other part is how to get everybody on board. As we wrap up now.
It's simple. If I were to be in that position today, it's simple. It's about directly declaring a state of emergency to every citizen and say, look, it's a global pandemic across the world. So it's not Nigeria that is facing food crisis. It's global. But how do we tackle it within our country locally? Okay, and we have to use local strategy and local ideas to tackle those things. And as I said, the fundamental is in everybody's home. Let every Nigerian begin to look at how well they can begin to adopt home gardening, home farming, either in schools, either in our homes, so that we can have structured system that you can say, okay, in my house, I'm planting yam. You can plant your yam in bags, in sacks. You can have your tomatoes with a small pot of land and plant it there. Let's begin to look at this role and dimension toward food security. And again, government needs to begin to look at how best our markets, which are the major hubs, markets can reduce the price. Again, don't forget that most of the food we consume today in Nigeria are more produced in the north. So transportation is also a major issue because 90% of our food is transported. We need to also open up other avenues of food distribution, either through that will be fast and cheap and available, either through, and I will always advise rail transportation system, so that if food are being moved from the north, it gets down to the market or Lagos or anywhere in the southwest the same day and with the same value, and everybody can still smile, still maintain the value. So let's open up other system of food distribution system, so we don't depend solely on road transport, which today is heavily 90% being used. Let's open up other channel so that food can get to our destinations and our homes easily.
It's all right. Co-founder and CEO, Corporate Farmers International Limited, Mr. Akinwale Alabi. Thank you for joining us on Business Nigeria. You have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.